In any case, here's a thought experiment about, so Nozick wrote this thing called Tale of a Slave, and the point of Tale of a Slave is you can't even define what slavery is. You can't define. He's basically like, we're going to go through these 10 steps, and at some point, clearly at step 0, dude is a slave, and at step 10, he's not a slave. And at what point does he gain his freedom? And you look at this and you can't say. And so, frickin' brilliant. Again, sort of a generalization of kind of the sort of non-aggression principle, which of course is against slavery, but what is even slavery? What is aggression? What is the government? Right. So suppose here we do a thing where we basically say, okay, you're a recipient of government benefits under the present system of government. We are going to wind this down, not in the orthodox libertarian way by basically just turning everything off, but in an unorthodox way, which sort of is kind of an extension, kind of an Einsteinian generalization of libertarianism. If you are, for example, earning a benefit stream from Social Security, we're going to convert this into an annuity, which is simply basically built out of government bonds. You're going to hold this bond. That way, that stupid Supreme Court decision saying you don't have a right to your Social Security, benefits goes away. No one can basically jack you around politically about this bond payment that you're due to receive. Even better, your securitized Social Security income, which has been turned into an annuity, that annuity can be sold for cash right now. So you basically say, okay, here's my insurance information, here's my Social Security benefits. I'm going to sell them all and have no government benefits and instead just a pile of cash. Now, if we make that change to the present situation, does society become sort of more or less libertarian? We're not actually taking anything away from anyone. We're actually making their benefits more secure. So we're not taking their benefits. At the same time, there's a sense that basically what was sort of wrong about this benefit stream was that it was basically a vote buying scheme in disguise, as of course so many democratic things are. And by basically saying, now this is your money, we can't take it away from you, you basically cut that political cord and made it no longer a vote buying scheme. So, what is your perception of like this way of kind of winding down the vast kind of crossing payment streams that is the U.S. government? Would that be a libertarian measure or like a non-libertarian measure?
Let's hear it, Mr. Yang.
Well, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know whether that would be libertarian or not. I'd have to think about that a little bit. It's not libertarian, but I don't know that it's necessarily anti-libertarian. You're working within an anti-libertarian framework, and if it could bring you more in that direction, I don't know. I'd have a lot of concerns about that. I mean, the problem with that is that I'd imagine a large portion of people are going to cash those in right away. And so what's the mechanism for paying that? Just money printing and direct payments to people?
One way that in my sort of,
because you might see, just my point, you might see, I mean, if you think the inflation of the last couple years is bad, if you let everybody just cash in their Social Security and the mechanism for paying that was just the Fed printing money and direct payments, handing it out to them, you might be looking at an inflation rate of 30%.
Well, two things. One is that, sort of as an Orthodox Austrian, it's not so much that I don't believe in soft currency. I basically view soft currency as government equity. So the thing is that there's kind of a difference when you view literally a Federal Reserve note as essentially stock in the United States government. You basically sort of get the right impression of how to handle that stock from how corporations handle their stock. So corporations will issue large numbers of shares to basically cover like one-time events. Like if like Apple buys Adobe, they'll issue like a shit ton of new Apple shares that will be covered by this purchase. So to the extent that you're sort of doing things on a one-time basis, that's going to that's very different from sort of becoming addicted to constantly issuing new shares and selling them, which is what dying companies do. Right. So in a sense, what you're talking about when you're sort of restructuring these payment streams is exactly that. You're restructuring them like in a bankruptcy. This is one of the advantages of treating the federal government as a firm is you immediately have all these sort of tools. And so you basically say, okay, we are creating new shares to basically cover these liabilities that were not previously recognized. We did not previously recognize that all of these coming Social Security payments were actual payments. We are therefore going to account for them by creating dollars or bonds, which are just what we call in Silicon Valley restricted stock. A bond is just a dollar that matures later in life. So this whole structure of like the Fed and the Treasury is just sort of this artificial and fake thing. And so essentially when you're restructuring this system, okay, yeah, by allowing people to sort of pull future payments into the present, you basically make them, there's a term that sometimes we're used is N-word riche. The N is for nouveau, and
that is not what I was thinking.
And can you please refrain from speaking French on my show?
Sorry, I'm still perfecting that line. And so you get a lot of people that become nouveau riche, right? And that's what really drives inflation. It's that these motherfuckers spend, right? And sorry. I'm not normally this amused by myself, but
I'm starting to think Ben Burgess was right.
About Haiti or Norway, really what he, I should have argued is that Norway should actually be ruled by a warlord named Barbecue, but in any case, and maybe one day it will be, and the inshallah, anyway, where were we? So yeah, that was kind of my answer to, again, like when you're started using these kind of more Einsteinian frameworks, the kind of libertarian framework of like what does a dollar even mean? Well, in a country where a dollar is hard currency, like that means one thing, and that's sort of one set of rules. But in a world where you're actually in the world of this deranged fiat currency experiment that has been a disaster every time in history it's been tried, you're still in that world, and you're still basically have to operate in that Einsteinian, in that very, very non-libertarian.
So I think the heart of the difference between the way we see this is that you see libertarianism as Newtonian physics, but we're living in an Einsteinian world. Whereas I see libertarianism as the actual laws, and we're pretending we're not in that world. Like we're pretending that we're in a different world where we can just print up all this money and we can do all of these things. And look, there are different schemes that can be attempted within this world which may bring us in a better direction back to the laws of economics, or might bring us in a direction further from them. But all of this stuff is still not changing the fact that conceive of the money printing however you want to. Think of it as a firm printing more stock or issuing more stock or something like that. The fact is that it is going to have the same inflationary effect, and that's what we've been seeing for our entire lifetime. And I'm not even talking about like measuring inflation by the CPI, just the fact that the price of everything is always like completely going up. The boom bust cycle continues. It's always being caused, like all of this stuff. So if we were, even in your example of treating the American government like a firm, if we're really treating it like a firm and it's going through bankruptcy, I don't think the process in bankruptcy is usually like issue a lot more stock. Would probably
it's almost exactly that. In a bankruptcy is issue a lot more stock, because you're basically saying that your debt in a bankruptcy, what you're doing is you're converting debts that can't be paid into equity that will basically deliver the same amount to everyone who is owed that debt.
Well, what you're gonna do is, in a bankruptcy, right? Is you're gonna sell off all of the assets that you have and pay back your creditors first, right? And your stockholders last.
Yeah, that's selling assets. There's plenty of companies that go bankrupt and keep operating through bankruptcy.
Sure.
And they're basically like, these are valuable. But the one thing that's generally done in a bankruptcy is this debt to equity conversion, where you basically say, okay, here are my fixed liabilities that I can't pay. And by converting this into equity, what we're going to say is that we don't know how much people will be able to get out of this thing, but everybody's going to get the same amount. And very often you cram down the existing equity holders because generally you cram them down. and be like, your existing equity is worthless because you were shareholders in this thing that failed.
Well, sure,
And
but
so
and the law dictates that you have to pay off your lenders before you pay off your stockholders.
So you have you have basically a seniority structure. So the thing is, what you're doing in a bankruptcy is almost kind of rationalizing a system that's sort of relatively insane. If you have a thing that can be operated at a profit, I mean, there's enormous value in the United States, right? This is very, very valuable property, and I think it's being operated very, very poorly. And so the sense of like, okay, it has a certain set of obligations. The fact that you held a T-bill rather than a right to a social security benefit, that shouldn't affect basically your right to be paid. And so what we basically have to do is create a structure in which bondholders and social security benefit receivers and everyone who's sort of been promised money by this thing gets kind of the same amount. And that's sort of best done by creating a lot of equity, which is sort of the normal procedure in a bankruptcy.